Mountain Monsters has been off the air for years, but the real reason production stopped has finally been revealed. This wasn't a simple cancellation. It was a forced shutdown triggered by massive lawsuits, insurance investigations, and fraud allegations that Travel Channel desperately tried to hide. Former crew members are now exposing systematic evidence fabrication, cast members suing each other over stolen money, Trapper's family demanding justice. The truth buried for years is finally coming to light. Subscribe now, because what's being revealed about why Mountain Monsters really ended is darker than anyone imagined. Mountain Monsters production came to an abrupt halt in late 2022, but the circumstances surrounding that shutdown were deliberately obscured by Travel Channel and the production companies involved. What viewers were told was a mutual decision to end the series after a successful run was actually an emergency stoppage triggered by legal and financial crises that made continuing production impossible. Cast members arrived for what they believed would be a routine filming week in West Virginia, only to be informed via group text message that production was suspended indefinitely. No explanation was provided beyond vague references to business complications requiring immediate attention. Equipment trucks that had already arrived at filming locations were turned around and sent back to storage facilities. Local guides and property owners who'd been contracted for the week's investigations were told their services were no longer needed, with some never receiving the cancellation fees they'd been promised in their agreements. The chaos and lack of communication revealed a production in complete disarray, scrambling to shut down operations before information about brewing legal problems became public knowledge. Crew members who'd worked on Mountain Monsters for years were blindsided by the sudden shutdown. Camera operators, sound technicians, and production assistants who depended on the show for steady income found themselves unemployed without warning or severance packages. Several crew members later reported that their final paychecks bounced, requiring them to pursue legal action just to recover wages they'd already earned for work completed before the shutdown. The production company, Ping Pong Productions, stopped responding to phone calls and emails from cast and crew seeking information about when or if filming would resume. The silence suggested something far more serious than typical production delays or budget negotiations. Industry insiders began hearing rumors about lawsuits, insurance problems, and financial irregularities that had finally caught up with a show that had been operating under questionable practices for years. Travel Channel maintained public silence about the shutdown for months, refusing to confirm or deny whether Mountain Monsters would return. That silence was strategic. The network was consulting with legal teams about how to distance itself from the mounting scandals while minimizing its own liability exposure. Internal documents later revealed that Travel Channel executives had been aware of problematic practices on Mountain Monsters for years, but chose to ignore them as long as the show delivered acceptable ratings and revenue. The lawsuit that ultimately forced Mountain Monsters production to stop permanently was filed in October 2022 by a coalition of former crew members alleging a pattern of labor violations, unsafe working conditions, and systematic fraud that the production company had perpetrated over multiple seasons. The complaint, filed in West Virginia State Court, named Ping Pong Productions, Travel Channel's parent company Warner Bros. Discovery, and several individual producers as defendants. The allegations were damning and specific, backed by documentation including contracts, emails, text messages, and testimony from dozens of witnesses. The lawsuit's central claims focused on wage theft. Crew members alleged they were consistently paid less than their contracts specified, forced to work excessive hours without overtime compensation, and denied meal penalties and other legally mandated benefits. Production assistants reported working 16-hour days during investigation filming, but being paid for only 8 hours, with producers threatening termination if they complained about the discrepancies. The complaint included detailed records showing systematic underpayment totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars across multiple crew members over several seasons. Even more explosive were allegations about evidence fabrication. Former production assistants provided sworn declarations describing how they were instructed to plant fake footprints, create artificial claw marks on trees, and place hair samples and scat that would later be discovered by the Ames team during investigations. One former employee detailed purchasing a gorilla costume from a Hollywood effects company and wearing it during night filming while cast members pretended to hunt for cryptids. The lawsuit included receipts for these purchases, emails discussing logistics of creating fake evidence, and text messages where producers explicitly acknowledged they were staging encounters because authentic cryptid activity couldn't be relied upon to provide enough dramatic content for each episode. The unsafe working conditions allegations focused on nighttime filming in dangerous terrain without proper safety equipment, inadequate medical support during remote investigations, and pressure on cast members to continue working despite injuries and health problems. The complaint specifically cited Buck's ATV accident and subsequent filming while he was clearly impaired by pain medications as examples of production prioritizing content over crew safety. Insurance fraud allegations claimed the production company had misrepresented the nature of filming activities to obtain coverage, then filed false claims when injuries occurred. The legal warfare among Mountain Monsters cast members revealed that the Ames team's apparent brotherhood was a facade hiding bitter disputes over money, credit, and control of the show's valuable intellectual property. The conflicts began even before Trapper's death, but escalated dramatically afterward as surviving cast members fought over who deserved what share of residual payments, merchandising revenue, and potential future earnings from the Mountain Monsters brand. Wild Bill filed a lawsuit in 2021 against the production company, claiming he was owed over $300,000 in unpaid residuals from streaming and international distribution that his contract entitled him to receive. His complaint alleged that Ping Pong Productions had deliberately hidden revenue streams and provided false accounting statements to avoid paying cast members their contractual shares. Wild Bill's attorneys subpoenaed financial records that revealed Mountain Monsters had generated millions in revenue from Netflix licensing, Amazon Prime streaming, and international sales that cast members had never been informed about or compensated for, despite contractual provisions entitling them to percentage participation. Buck and Jeff filed a joint lawsuit making similar claims, arguing they'd been systematically cheated out of earnings they'd legitimately earned through years of dangerous work on the show. Their case included allegations that producers had created shell companies to funnel revenue away from the main production entity, specifically to avoid contractual obligations to pay cast members. The legal filings exposed how production companies exploit reality television performers through complex corporate structures designed to minimize payments while maximizing producer profits. Most bitter was the conflict between cast members themselves over merchandising rights. When Mountain Monsters merchandise, including t-shirts, hats, and collectibles, began generating significant revenue, disputes erupted about who owned the rights to the Ames team brand, individual cast member images, and catchphrases used on the show. Huckleberry claimed he'd never signed away his image rights and demanded compensation for any merchandise featuring his likeness. Wild Bill and Jeff argued they had agreements with the production company that entitled them to merchandising percentages, while Buck contended that all cast members should share equally in merchandise revenue regardless of individual contracts. The legal battles became so contentious that cast members stopped speaking to each other entirely, destroying any possibility of the team reuniting for future productions, even if the show's other problems were resolved. The insurance investigation that ultimately made Mountain Monsters production legally impossible began after Buck's ATV accident, when the production company's liability insurer received a claim for medical expenses and disability payments related to his injuries. Insurance adjusters conducting routine investigation of the claim discovered discrepancies between what the production company had disclosed about filming activities versus what actually occurred during Mountain Monsters investigations. The insurer had been told filming involved outdoor recreation and nature documentation, with appropriate safety protocols, when in reality cast members were conducting dangerous nighttime investigations in rough terrain without adequate medical support, safety equipment, or supervision. Buck's accident triggered a comprehensive audit of all previous claims filed by Mountain Monsters production over multiple seasons. Investigators discovered a disturbing pattern. Numerous cast and crew members had filed injury claims related to filming, far exceeding the rate expected for the type of production activities the insurance company believed they were covering. Wild Bill's heart attack, various sprains and fractures among crew members, and multiple emergency room visits for injuries sustained during investigations revealed that Mountain Monsters was significantly more dangerous than the production company had disclosed when obtaining coverage. The insurance company determined that Ping Pong Productions had committed material misrepresentation by failing to disclose the true nature and risks of filming activities. They described Mountain Monsters as comparable to wildlife documentary production, when it actually involved cast members hiking dangerous terrain entertain at night, building elaborate physical structures without engineering oversight, and engaging in activities that would require specialized stunt coordination and safety protocols if accurately disclosed. This misrepresentation potentially voided coverage for all previous claims and certainly terminated the policy going forward. Without insurance coverage, mountain monsters couldn't legally film. No location would grant permits, no network would authorize production, and cast and crew wouldn't work without liability protection. The production company attempted to obtain new coverage from other insurers, but once the previous carrier's investigation findings became known in the industry, no reputable insurance company would cover mountain monsters at any price. The few quotes the production company received for high-risk coverage required premiums so expensive they exceeded the show's entire production budget, making filming financially impossible even if they could find an insurer willing to take the risk. The legal action initiated by Trapper's family in 2023 opened a painful and complicated chapter in Mountain Monster's troubled legacy, pitting Trapper's widow and children against the production company and network over how their deceased family member's image and legacy had been exploited since his death in 2019. The family's attorneys filed suit claiming that Ping Pong Productions had made verbal promises to compensate Trapper's estate for continued use of his image in episodes, promotional materials, and merchandise following his death, but had never formalized those promises in writing or made any payments. After Trapper died, Mountain Monsters continued airing episodes featuring him, released tribute merchandise with his image, and used his likeness extensively in marketing materials to promote new seasons, all generating revenue that his family never received a share of despite alleged promises from producers. The lawsuit argued this constituted both breach of contract based on oral agreements and violation of Trapper's publicity rights that passed to his estate upon death. West Virginia law provides that publicity rights, the right to control commercial use of one's name, image, and likeness, survive death and can be enforced by heirs for a specified period. Trapper's family claimed the production company had no legal right to continue profiting from his image without compensation to his estate, yet they'd done exactly that for over 3 years, while stonewalling the family's requests for accounting and payment. The emotional dimension of the lawsuit was heartbreaking. Trapper's widow described watching Mountain Monsters merchandise featuring her late husband being sold online and in stores while her family struggled financially with medical debt from his final illness and funeral expenses that the production company had promised to help with, but never did. She testified in depositions about producers calling after Trapper's death expressing condolences and assuring her the family would be taken care of, then subsequently ignoring her calls and emails when she attempted to discuss the promised financial support. The family's legal demands were substantial. They sought an accounting of all revenue generated from Trapper's image since his death, compensation for past use of his likeness, and an injunction preventing any future commercial use of Trapper's image until a licensing agreement with appropriate compensation was negotiated. The injunction threat was existential for Mountain Monsters because Trapper was the show's most beloved figure, and removing him from future content would eliminate much of the show's nostalgic appeal and marketability. The systematic evidence fabrication on Mountain Monsters was exposed in devastating detail when multiple former production assistants came forward with documentation proving that virtually every major cryptid encounter and evidence discovery on the show had been staged, scripted, or manipulated to create false drama. The whistleblowers provided attorneys with emails, text messages, invoices, and video footage that painted a picture of a production built entirely on deception from its earliest seasons through its final episodes. One former production assistant provided a detailed written statement describing his responsibilities during filming, which included arriving at investigation locations hours before cast members to plant evidence that would later be discovered during filming. He described creating fake Bigfoot footprints using carved wooden stamps, hanging tufts of synthetic hair purchased from costume suppliers on tree branches where they'd be noticed by cameras, and placing animal scat purchased from exotic animal facilities to suggest cryptid presence. The statement included photographs he'd secretly taken of these evidence-planting activities as insurance against potential legal liability. Images that clearly showed production crew members staging the very evidence that would be presented as authentic discoveries. Email correspondence between producers and special effects companies revealed extensive discussions about creating creature costumes for night filming. One email chain detailed specifications for a realistic Bigfoot suit with appropriate movement characteristics for distance filming that cost over $12,000 to manufacture. The emails explicitly discussed how the costume would be used during Mountain Monsters investigations, with cast members pretending to encounter an actual cryptid. Invoices for the costume purchase and rental agreements for subsequent uses provided irrefutable documentation of premeditated fraud. text messages between producers showed casual acknowledgement of the fabrication with jokes about manufacturing evidence, and discussions of which cast members were better at selling fake discoveries convincingly on camera. Perhaps most damning were behind-the-scenes video clips that production assistants had recorded on personal phones showing the reality of filming versus what appeared in broadcast episodes. One clip showed a dramatic Bigfoot encounter being filmed multiple times from different angles with a clearly visible person in a costume, followed by producers coaching cast members on how to react more convincingly for the final take that would air. The authenticity that made Mountain Monsters appealing was completely manufactured. Multiple property owners across West Virginia filed lawsuits against Mountain Monsters production, claiming trespassing, property damage, and filming without proper authorization or compensation. The legal actions revealed that producers had often filmed on private land without securing proper permits or landowner consent, relying on verbal agreements that were never formalized or compensated appropriately. One lawsuit filed by a family in Pocahontas County detailed extensive property damage caused by construction of elaborate traps and staging areas for investigations. The production had built wooden structures, dug pits, and cleared vegetation without permission, leaving behind debris and environmental damage when filming concluded. The property owners estimated repair costs exceeding $50,000 and sought compensation plus punitive damages for the unauthorized use of their land for commercial purposes. Another case involved a landowner who claimed producers had promised payment of $5,000 for location access, but never delivered the money despite filming multiple episodes on the property over 2 seasons. When the landowner attempted to collect, producers stopped responding to communications entirely. The lawsuit included text messages and emails documenting the original agreement and subsequent attempts to obtain payment. Most problematic were allegations that production had filmed in state parks and protected wilderness areas without proper permits from authorities. West Virginia Department of Natural Resources investigators discovered that Mountain Monsters had conducted filming in restricted areas, built structures in protected habitats, and violated environmental regulations regarding waste disposal and vegetation disturbance. The state issued fines totaling over $100,000 and referred the matter for potential criminal prosecution. These land disputes created additional legal and financial burdens that made continuing production untenable, while also damaging relationships with West Virginia communities that had initially welcomed the show as promoting local cryptid folklore and tourism. Travel Channel's decision to permanently end Mountain Monsters came after executives conducted a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis revealing the show had become a massive liability that outweighed any remaining revenue potential. The network faced mounting legal exposure from multiple lawsuits naming Travel Channel alongside production companies as co-defendants. Even if the network prevailed in litigation, defending against claims would cost millions in legal fees while generating negative publicity that damaged Travel Channel's brand reputation with viewers and advertisers. Ratings for Mountain Monsters had declined significantly in later seasons as viewer skepticism about evidence authenticity increased, and the show failed to evolve beyond repetitive investigation formats. The loss of Trapper had hurt viewership substantially, and attempts to continue without him proved unsuccessful at retaining audience loyalty. Meanwhile, production costs had increased due to insurance complications, legal compliance requirements, and cast member salary demands, shrinking already marginal profit margins to unsustainable levels. Network executives recognized that Mountain Monsters had become associated with fraud allegations and exploitation controversies that conflicted with Travel Channel's efforts to position itself as a credible source of adventure and exploration content. The show's reputation for faking evidence undermined the network's other paranormal programming and created skepticism among viewers about whether any Travel Channel content could be trusted. The decision was made to cancel Mountain Monsters permanently, cease all future development, and gradually phase out the show from streaming platforms and syndication to distance the network from ongoing controversies. Travel Channel announced plans to develop new cryptid and paranormal investigation programming with stricter authenticity standards, enhanced safety protocols, and transparent disclosure about investigation methods to rebuild viewer trust damaged by Mountain Monsters' troubled legacy. Wild Bill attempts independent YouTube content with minimal success. Buck withdrew from public life, managing chronic pain and working occasional construction jobs. Jeff explores other paranormal projects, but Mountain Monsters' fraud reputation makes him unhireable. Huckleberry does small-scale cryptid hunting and convention appearances for modest income. The Ames team is fractured beyond repair, members no longer speaking due to legal disputes and personal betrayals. Mountain Monsters became a cautionary tale about reality TV exploitation rather than Appalachian folklore celebration.